My guest today, Dr. Lee Baucom, has spent the past 25 years trying to save marriages. I spent years trying to, escape two of them. We are not at odds because the first thing he'll tell you is that some marriages were never safe to save. What he understands about relationships and how they work and break down is exactly what helps you understand what was done to you. This conversation today is for every woman and man out there who has been told that they didn't try hard enough. So, without further ado, I bring you Dr. Lee Baucom. Lee, it is so wonderful to have you with me here today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad to talk to you. I know our listeners are going to be equally excited to hear what you have to share with all of us. Um, Tell us a little bit about yourself, Lee.
Yeah, so my background, I was trained as a therapist. I did training as an individual therapist and also specialized in marriage and family therapy. And after doing a couple of masters and a PhD, I was writing my dissertation and I turned to my wife after reading an article about coaching and I said, this is actually how I work. And there's a reason why I was already working that way, I'll tell you about. But she said, so what are you going to do? And I finished my PhD and jumped into 3 years of training as a coach, but I was already in practice. I'd been in practice for a number of years at that point. The reason I was acting as a coach was because I had watched the ineffectiveness of marriage therapy and was
Mhm.
frustrated with it, and honestly didn't see how that was going to change in within that the dynamic of working as a therapist. And so coaching gave me some new tools, some new possibilities that helped the process. And if you complain about something long enough, you probably ought to say what you do think.
Yeah.
And so I started working on what does actually help a marriage. Now, the background is I watched in my family some, not my immediate family, but extended family, some pretty explosive and really damaging divorces, marriages and divorces.
Mm.
They didn't marry well and they didn't end well. And there were some what I would consider to be abusive segments to on multiple levels. And after the
Mm.
divorces, there was more abuse. And so I watched that and just thought there's got to be a better way for people to find their way through this path of marriage, like what that looks like and how do you build that. So that began to be what I was building out as the Save the Marriage system. And that's now been used around the world for people to either figure out how to save their marriage or realize they cannot do that and they need to move forward, which is for me kind of the possibilities here. What I am
Yeah.
always concerned about is people who just stay locked in confusion. They're not sure what is going on. And so I wanted to create a roadmap for how to do that because what I realize is people don't have roadmaps of what a marriage is supposed to look like. We don't do a good job of preparing people for that in a marriage or in life. And so the fact that a marriage goes sideways, not a surprise. So that's how I got to here. I've been doing this work now for over 3 decades and been online since 1999. So way last century.
Wow. Longer
And,
than I have.
well, yeah, I mean, that was way back in, well, it's a whole nother category of days. But, and since then, I've built a number of other programs and I've written some books on topics around thriving in life and about how to work on your relationship. And just if people are curious, I've been married now for 38 years to the same person.
Wow. Well,
So
congratulations.
we've tried to put this into practice also.
Very good. Very good. Well, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but most of my listeners know that I've been married twice to two very difficult individuals, and I consider them high conflict. It was very abusive marriages that I lived
Mm.
through. And I, was a single mom for a really long time, and I am now happily married, recently married to my husband, and we've been married since October, and things are going well. So
Good.
I have learned, some things along the way, right? But I remember the day of when I tried so hard to like save my second marriage, and we were together for about 10 years. And again, this was an abusive person. And I think when you're in that dynamic, you're not really sure what you're dealing with.
Mm.
And you're gaslit and like led to believe that you're the problem. And so I was believing that I was the problem, that there was something innately wrong with me. And so I, wanted to desperately fix the marriage. I signed us up for marriage counseling, in fact. And it did not go as I had anticipated. In fact, we saw two different marriage counselors, and they were both used as like a tool. One of these sessions, I remember my ex-husband had said, I'm only here to tell her that I don't want to be married to her anymore. This
Mm.
is not going to work. Right. And then a day after, he immediately apologized. And the next therapist, there was no follow through. There was no real follow through when it came to like individual sessions. Have you experienced that before? Like, have you encountered a couple in the work that you've done that have been in a similar dynamic, and how did you identify it?
Yeah. So what you're really talking about is not a working on things. It's not. It's a pattern of blaming someone, right? That's very different than working on things. So I've seen it many times that if every path leads back to you being the problem,
Yeah.
we're not talking about repair dynamics. This is really a control dynamic. And so when that happens in therapy, and if the therapist is not systemically aware, they're pulled into the fact that, this is something that they're trying to work on rather than being able to label the control dynamic. So I often saw the deflection, whatever was thrown
Mm,
was bounced back to the other person. The rewriting events, which there is the very toxic side of the gaslighting where they're actually creating evidence of that, but just rewriting events where I'm listening to two people who have two very distinct, almost opposite viewpoints of the same situation tells me that there is a deep problem, not when they see it from their perspective, but when the perspective is completely in a different reality. That's the rewriting that often happens because
mm,
it's putting you back into your role as the problem.
yeah.
And then the other one is when I see a lot of there's no resolution to anything.
Mm.
There's constant redirection. Those are all symptoms of the fact that we're not talking about dealing with the marriage dynamics. We're talking about blaming the marriage dynamics.
Yes, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think when I had gone down this path initially, and a lot of my listeners can relate to it. You are led to believe that you are the problem this whole entire time, and right. And as a lot of women, we want to try to fix things. We're nurturers, and so we go down this path of, okay, how can I better myself? And that ended up getting me into individual therapy,
Hmm.
which, over the years saved my life and helped me recognize that I wasn't crazy and I wasn't this problem. But I still remember being on that journey of like wanting to save my marriage so much. And I know like trying to save marriages is one thing, but I found like this common denominator in the few sessions that we had in marriage counseling. And my listeners will say the same thing, that their partner was like very much in this victim mentality. I like to refer to them as professional victims. Everyone else is to blame for all of their problems in life. They have never done anything wrong, right? There's no accountability. Is that something that you see, like, I guess, personality wise or presentation wise? Does that eventually come out if you're dealing with, a couple where maybe initially one's trying to save the marriage and then you're seeing, well, there's not a whole lot of saving that can be done? Is that something that you've encountered before?
Yeah, so I'm not a person who believes that a marriage should be saved at all costs, which is the situation that puts you in. If you're if they are the victim and therefore you're the perpetrator, you're the bad
Mhm.
guy,
Yep.
then the change is on you, and so that's not a very tenable work. What can you do at that point, right? There's no mutuality to that. My thing is about helping people see more clearly. So
Mm.
they can either repair wisely or they leave with more clarity and integrity. Like they go, yeah, I can't to do this. And I think that's an important point. Your thing of I'm going to save it can end up putting people into a save it at all costs. And at that point, you're willing to choke down whatever is fed because that gives you the opportunity. And I don't think that really creates much of a partnership.
Mm.
So it's very common. There, that's usually based in the dynamic being about control. Being a victim puts you in control of the situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, have you ever had the opportunity to tell someone that you thought it was, it was time to leave the relationship versus, working on the relationship? Has that been something that you've experienced in the years of your work?
On a regular basis. In fact,
Okay.
I would say to people who come to my program, if you are experiencing abuse of any type, that is not the time to save a relationship. That is the time for safety. We're no longer talking about repair work, but protection. And so that's a filter that I often use. There are really kind of two questions that go hand in hand. Can it be repaired? Is one,
Mm-hmm.
but right beside that is it safe or viable to do that? Like, if I am trying to repair it, am I going to be safe? If
Mm.
there is consistent harm without any ownership or without any change in the process, that's when we shift from not repair work, but to protection. That's when you have to say, I can't take that on a regular basis. And I think that's an important conversation to be had.
Yes, yes. Now you have this concept that I've looked into a bit. Baucom's razor. Okay. And so it's that most bad behavior in a marriage is neglect, not malice. So what does actual malice look like? And how do people miss it?
So, just to restate, what I would say is that you don't have to label behavior as malice when neglect is more likely. So, what is the difference? There's harm, and that is possible either way, right? Neglect can hurt just as much as actual malice, but neglect has the option of change to it. Like, if I realize that I'm neglecting, I could change that behavior. If I realize I've neglected my body, I can make changes to, rectify that. If I'm trying to destroy my body, that's a different question. So malice resists change. That's a test point.
Mm.
Neglect is often based in someone being unaware, unskilled. They don't see what's going on. Malice is from a different place. It's about control. It is intentional. It's meant to be there. So,
Okay.
what I try to draw a distinction is not about the harm, but the intent of that, because it
Ah.
hurts either way. So many times people have a negative bias on what's going on that lets us slip into assigning malice. Is it possible for it to be malice? Yes. Should that be our default setting? Not until we run it through and say, is this neglect or is it malice? And if you then arrive at the malice, see our
Mm.
prior conversation.
Right, exactly, exactly. It makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense now that we're talking more in depth about it. Um, when there's an individual that maybe has religious beliefs
Mm.
and they have been conditioned to believe certain things, and some I'm not a religious person. I was previously religious and I'm no longer, but a lot of my listeners are. And I think there's a big push for the marriage must stay together, divorce is bad. And I know that your philosophy is, it's not about just saving the marriage no matter what, especially if there could be harm that's being caused. Have you encountered individuals that have maybe had that belief? And despite maybe what you were trying to help them with, of like, maybe it's time to leave, they stayed regardless. Did they ever
Mm.
come back to you? Have you encountered this at all?
Yeah, so it's not just religious beliefs. We have religious beliefs, we have political beliefs, we have cultural beliefs that can all lead somebody to stay around longer because they feel like they should do that. That's the kind of the should mechanism there, right?
Yes,
Of the
yes.
shame. And so there are two sides to that. One is when people use that as a control mechanism. The other is when we've internalized that and are struggling with what that means. And in either case, it does lead to, for the person who is caught in that, to the same feeling that if they were to go against that, they would be shamed, they would be evil, they would be whatever. And in some cases, even shunned, like disregarded by their community. And so they can feel that cost. I don't know of any core piece of religion, and I've studied religion, that actually looks for the individual to be harmed.
Mm,
That is not what is bound in any religion.
right.
Freedom,
Yeah.
true connection, community, absolutely. And sometimes we confuse those. But when we find ourselves being harmed, it's a pretty good guess that there's a violation of the true depths of that religion, even the politics and even the cultural piece, that can feel like it's at all costs and misses the possibility of grace and of love that could be behind that.
Yes. And, to piggyback off a little bit what you said, you mentioned the word shame. And I remember reading Dr. Brene Brown, and I love Brene Brown's work. And she talks a lot about shame and
Mm,
vulnerability, right?
yeah.
And when I started listening to her audiobooks back in the day, it really did save me and changed my perspective because I recognized the reason why I stayed in my second marriage for as long as I had, which was a 10-year long relationship, was because I had this tremendous feeling of shame of disappointing my father, disappointing my family. This was now my second marriage. And I also was carrying this weight of maybe there's something innately wrong with me that now I'm experiencing these problems again, and yet a second marriage and this long term relationship. And because of the feelings of shame, I had to work to kind of get past that first before I really was able to recognize I need to leave this. There's not anything wrong with me. And if somebody thinks poorly of me by making this choice of leaving, then so be it. But
Mm.
I had to do what at that time was right for me. And it took me some time again to get over shame. Have you had conversations with individuals related to their feelings of maybe shame or disappointment to leave a relationship, leave a marriage, even if if there's malice or ill intent, or if there's not, right? And they're just at this point where they are hitting a brick wall over and over again. Their partner is refusing to change, refusing to have any accountability, shifting the blame on them.
Yeah, so if we go back with Brene Brown for a moment, her thing is that shame is the nature of being human, and those who do not experience shame,
Yeah.
that's a whole other category of pathology, right? That those would be sociopath, psychopath, people who don't have shame. So the rest of us humans are going to experience that,
Yeah.
and the part of our struggle with being vulnerable is that can on the backside feel the shame, and being vulnerable for in your instance is saying, you know what, this is more important than these beliefs, these voices I have in my head that are trying to keep me in a stuck point. I have often used the question, if you're whoever it is that they're putting in that, your father, your mother, whoever, knew how you were feeling, knew what was going on with you,
Mhm.
would they want you to stay? And that changes it from how am I feeling to how would others feel about me being in this abusive, this harmful situation. I have yet to have somebody who is in that situation be able to tell me that no, the loved ones would want them to endure that. Um,
Mm.
I am sure there are people who would hold to that because of what we just talked about earlier about those
Yeah.
cultural, the political, the religious things, but not many when they get down to really thinking about how would they be seen from the eyes of empathy. And so one way around the shame is to ask that question of how would others, if they knew what was going on behind closed doors, which is where the shame comes from, right? It's the
Yes. Yes.
hidden piece, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
That piece, when if they knew that, where would they stand? And
Mm.
as I've watched, when people do break that, when they break their silence, when they reach out and they say, "This is what's going on," I've watched the changes in the other people who may have been holding on and even implanting those beliefs and systems, not intentionally, but still there, um, do a reversal of suddenly going, that is, I don't want to hold to that. This is not what I
Mm,
want for my loved one. I don't want my loved one to be hurt, to be feel threatened, to feel fearful.
yes, yes. Uh, are there limiting beliefs that you keep seeing in marriages that are genuinely hurting people in the marriage?
You know, one of the biggest ones is people confusing endurance with integrity.
Oh.
They feel like, you know, if I just try harder, it will change. That's not always the case. That ends up being a case of endurance. Sometimes it's the limiting belief of leaving means I failed, as opposed to leaving can be a I did what was possible and I feel good about that. Regret is kind of the harder belief. It's not the limiting belief. It's the actual feeling that often comes for people when they can't say, I did what I'm willing to do. Not everything I could do, but what am I willing to do? Like what actions are good with where we are. Um, so the big piece there is people living outside of their integrity and confusing that with just endurance.
Okay. Okay. Now, do you think that limiting beliefs could be more observed of the beliefs that you shared with me, that men might have different beliefs versus women? I often get this gender conflict going on in my comments section on social media, and oh, it's all about the women or all it's about the men, right? And I'm just about humans in general.
Yeah.
But have you seen something that is more specific to one gender over the other?
So I also think that being human means we have limiting beliefs, and the only way we find those limiting beliefs is because we bump up against them long enough to go, "Oh wait, that's limiting me," right? And so, are there differences? I watch men. So one of the kind of unique things about my program is, as opposed to other relationship programs that are predominantly purchased and used by women,
Yeah.
mine is about 50-50.
Wow.
So interestingly, when I hear about the feelings, they are often very similar across genders of I don't want to be a failure. I, want to have a loving relationship. The I'm going to stick through this. I'm going to stay for the kids. All of those are from both sides. There are some specific things about what they're fearful about. For instance, I mean, in terms of safety, I'm not going to say it is an entirely a gender thing, but what's built in by our
Mhm.
culture about safety,
Yeah.
um, legitimately is, I think, truly rooted in some gender issues. My wife and I have
Yeah.
talked about this when, for instance, we're talking about me going somewhere. I don't think twice about, I'm going to go get gas and it's night. She's like, do you really think you do that? Now it's not a function of my thought process because it hasn't
Mm.
had to be. Will I go for a run in the evening or a walk in the evening or in the early morning when other people are not likely to be out? Yes. Would she? Not at all, because I haven't had to worry about that. And so those pieces of safety are legitimately rooted in some gender issues. That doesn't mean men can't be abused. It's just the predominance.
Right,
So
right.
that does filter into some of the thought process behind, I think, dealing with the difficult situation
And I think statistically, we can look at all these studies and we're going to see that there's a higher likelihood of men being abusive versus women being abusive.
by far.
It's just how the personality trait kind of goes, right? But there have been men that I've spoken to and I've worked with over the years that have been abused, and the abuse is very covert. It's not easy to spot. And I think there's a lot of these gender roles that take place. And
Hmm.
for men, it's hard to come forward and talk about, I've been abused. This is what my experience is. And when I meet with these individuals, they're not ever really speaking poorly about their ex, they're still holding a lot of accountability and they're still feeling like they're at fault for the failure of their marriage. I'm always cautious, right, when speaking to men who approach me for, coaching, and I pay attention to how they're interacting with me, the conversation that we're having, because there are men that are abusive that like to play the victim.
Mhm.
Right. And then they're still trying to shift the blame. I'm sure that, again, we've talked about this. You've encountered some of these very similar things. Um, if there is one person that is, I think, easy to identify for me, it's always the true victim. Like I can always spot who the true victim is after, conversations, after reading communication between two parties. For you, is it easy to spot talking to a couple who somebody truly is?
So I think your point is what on first blush you assume. I think it's always dangerous. I try to hold the first assumption in check until I check it out. So when somebody tells me, is it so? Well, let's define two different things. There is the person who is a victim, like something happened to them, and then
Yeah.
there is the role of being a victim. Those are very distinct things. There are people who can play the role of being a victim where nothing has actually happened to them. It's just how they're framing it and how they're blaming, as opposed to somebody who is making them the victim, like they are suffering the harm. And so I hold those two pieces of going, which is this? Am I
Mm.
hearing the role or am I hearing the actuality? And that does take some time. So you're correct to ask about the communication, not just how they feel, but what does the communication look like? What specifics are they talking about? So can I spot them? Yes. Do I assume that right off the bat? I don't, because human nature often likes for each of us to feel like we are, just a secret little idea in our head that we're blameless. And
Mhm.
so I remember that it's possible. I've had people in my office who both feel like they are blameless. And as they tell the story, there sometimes truly is a blamelessness to it, as much as they just didn't know what they were doing. And they have mutually created a damaging dynamic between them, as opposed to sometimes I've had people who felt both blameless. And I'm going, no, this is you. You're going to have to own this part.
Right.
Um, and then sometimes when I'm like, you both have some blame here that we need to step into and look at, because now it's become a systemic issue. I'm always looking for where the system is spinning around. The system includes where we come in, though, right? What beliefs
Right.
we bring into the process. And that's back to some of the comments you made about your feelings when you were faced with that. How does that mean I'm a failure? What does that mean? What will people think about me? Those are beliefs that are now being expressed as self-doubt.
Mm, mhm. That for me, like the self-doubt has always, I think, been there after I found my way into these relationships, and then as I worked my way out of the relationships and the healing from them. And for the longest time, I had this thought in my head of like, I am never going to get married again. I don't want anything to do with a relationship, no serious relationship for me ever. And well, I certainly met a man that was not willing to let me go and was very persistent and in the best of ways, and showed me something very different. Um, for men and women out there that are listening to this conversation that have maybe gotten themselves out of a really unhealthy marriage or relationship and have a thought of maybe I'm never going to find anyone else again, or all men are bad, or all women are bad, what would you say to that person listening?
Yeah, so I'm going to reflect on one thing you said, and then I'll see if that rounds around. You talked about the fact that he would not let you go,
Hmm.
and then you added for the best of reasons, because I just want to know that he won't let you go thing, they
Yes.
won't let you go, is also the symptom of a troubled relationship,
Oh,
right?
definitely.
Depending on what's behind it.
Mhm.
Like, I want to hold on to you for my reasons versus I see something of us together, right? And so that piece is important. And what that does in many ways is disprove the fact that all of whatever are bad. There are, so I often ask people to kind of notice around them, who are the people that they notice in there. And this isn't looking for a mate, it's just looking observationally, like who disproves that for you. If I've got a limiting belief, one of the ways that we can deal with a limiting belief is ask for the counter proof of that. So if I believe that all women are evil, can I look around and go, oh, well, she breaks that, and for many, I've had the conversation. So who would it be? And sometimes they'll name a friend, a mother, a sister, a cousin. They'll find someone that is not. And if one person is not, you've just disproven your limiting belief. And then the question is, so then how many don't fit that role? How many are out there? Is it just that person, or is it possible that there are others? And then it changes to, how do I filter? Like, what
Mm.
filters would I use to find the people? Because to believe that no people are out for bad intent is also incorrect. And so you're trying to find, where is the balance for me? Where is a safe place? What would I use as the categories to decide which funnel am I going to put them in? Are they the okay people, or the no, I need to be clear about people? And we all do that in life anyway. It's just whether we're doing it with accuracy. And so the more
Mm.
accurate we are by asking the question, what is the proof? What would I use as a frame for that, can be helpful for any of those limiting beliefs that are moving us away really from relationship.
Yes, and I think for like, my perspective and my experience was I was keeping myself away from potentially happiness or finding, something that felt good for me because I had everything I was seeing was red flags. And I remember
Hmm.
having a very distinct conversation with my therapist. And I, when you study narcissism and, cluster B personality disorders, that's all you start to see, right?
Yeah.
Everything is a red flag. Everyone walking is a red flag,
Yep.
and everyone's a narcissist. Everyone's a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to pull myself out of that. I had a really good conversation with a mentor of mine, and I had to stop viewing all of this content that was just about narcissism 24/7. When I pulled away from that, I was really scared. The world seemed very scary to me because I've had these really bad relationships, these bad marriages with high conflict people, cluster B personality disorders, right? And so I started to have these conversations of, all right, not everybody is dangerous. There are safe people out here, but really starting to pay attention to how my body felt
Mm.
around others and how people were, engaging with me, how they made me feel became more important to me than trying to find the red flags and determine if they were a narcissist or a psychopath or anything else. But I was basing it, and I've been doing that since that time, of how I feel around other individuals. I'm sure you're familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've learned to listen to my body, right? If it feels overheated, if my chest feels hot and red, I'm anxious, I'm overly anxious. There's a reason for that. My body is telling me something before my brain can catch up. Would you agree with that statement? Our body's letting us know before we figure it out.
Yeah, so I want to draw a distinction, because the answer is yes, but I also watch people who say, well, you've got to trust your gut. And what they are telling me with their trusting their gut is not particularly accurate. They're using their gut as the measurement. Like, that's not always telling you the answer. It's telling you information, right? It's revealing something to you. And so to take those messages in is important. So what you try to do is track over time what your, not just your gut, but your body was telling you, not just, oh, that means this, right? And so it's jumping to a conclusion of, what does that mean? It's broadening it out to, what does my body tell me? So back to your thing of how you frame it. So if you're surrounded by that, you're correct. That's what you end up seeing. At the beginning of my career, before we had kids, I was a chaplain in a hospital and covered the neonatal area, which meant that I was watching sick babies on a regular basis and dealing with sick and dying babies. And so as we started talking about kids, I was like, oh gosh, every child. this happens to every
Oh.
child, because that's all I saw. I mean, the well ones didn't need a chaplain around, so they would just went home. And so I
Mm.
was constantly, and so I started on a nightly basis at the end of my shift. This is back before they started hiding the nursery. I would go to the big window, right?
Yes.
And I would just sit there and stare at all the healthy babies and go,
Mm.
okay, I dealt with that one, but look at all these healthy ones. And that helped me to balance it out. And so then as I began to be able to be balanced out, I didn't also never had the attitude of, well, we're safe having a kid. Nothing could possibly go wrong. I knew that there were possibilities. And so it gave me a balanced mental perspective. Now, the piece that you're talking about is then how do you rate people around you? And many people who have found themselves in the patterns that you describe are hypersensitive to the signs, and they have to go, okay, I need to do a little reality check. And the danger is when people override the information entirely, like something's off, but that's okay. It must just be me imagining things. That's the danger. And so taking it in and going, okay, that's information. What's going on here is a way of taking in that and using it not to give you the firm, but the hunch. And then to
Mm.
ask the question, is that accurate? The other thing that comes out of that, though, is there are how many billions of people in the world? I mean, if you say to that one person makes me feel a little odd, you don't have to go, I probably still need to figure out something with them. You can just say there are plenty of other people to be connected with and be in community with, and not to have that as a shame on you for not figuring that out.
That's a really great point, and I have this conversation often with clients of mine of it's not about finding all the answers. Sometimes we don't need to have all the answers. We don't need to know all the whys or, why our ex-partner is the way they are if they were abusive, why they're doing the things that they're doing. But having comfort and knowing that we've made the best decision for ourselves and that we are becoming the best version of ourselves is enough,
Hmm.
right? And I want to ask you something that maybe some people are too polite to ask a marriage therapist or a marriage coach, but I'm going to do it anyway.
You go for it.
Um, so where there's abuse in a relationship, right? And we've talked about this, and the victim often doesn't know what to even call it yet. What happens when that couple goes to therapy together? What does the dynamic actually like do to the person that's being harmed?
Hmm. So just to be real clear, marriage therapy is not for an abuser, period. I mean, if they're ready to face those issues, let them do that on their own. But marriage therapy in particular is not appropriate for active abuse. So there is that place. Couples therapy assumes some shared responsibility. That's just built into the model. If there's going to be a shift, they've got to work on that together. In abusive dynamics, unfortunately, that piece of the therapist trying to deal with responsibility can actually reinforce the harm. And so, yes, I mean, whenever a therapist and therapists need to be aware of the potential for harm, and most have been trained, but sometimes they miss it in the
Mhm.
initial moments. And so what I'm often looking at is where can they take responsibility in, and do they make a move forward? If they can't, that tells me something important. I think safety and clarity always come before any joint repair is possible. And if there is abuse, you're not working on that. In the case of they might not be able to name it, I've watched plenty of therapists as I've done supervision and in my own office going, wait, this is abuse. That's what we have here. And to be able to say to the person, do you realize this is what's going on? And just kind of describing for them what you're seeing so that they can, you can give the symptoms and say, we call that abuse. That's what that looks like. And not saying that is a danger too. I have made sure many times when I reveal that to reveal that without the abuser being in the room,
Okay.
and making sure that they can create a safety plan, because what am I going to get but a higher level of abuse if I'm not careful? So
Exactly.
being able to name it is important.
Yes. Now, many women, most of my clients are women that I work with, but women and men that aren't in the marriage anymore. They're now, having to co-parent with this high conflict narcissistic person. They find themselves in legal battles. They find themselves in family court often, more times than anyone would like to, right? And family court, going through that process with an abusive person is re-traumatizing,
Mm,
re-victimizing.
mhm.
But the same tactics from the marriage are now being used through the children, through the legal process. We call it post separation abuse. What do you see in that transition?
Well, I mean, that because nothing changed, right? I mean, that is the piece.
Yes.
So the patterns don't disappear. Whatever relational patterns you have, they don't disappear, they relocate. When there is a troubled relationship that I think has a shot, one of my things is if you work through your issues, that will help you afterwards. But that's not what we're talking about here. When you're talking about it being abusive, it's not trying to solve the issue, it's just going to relocate. And so the patterns just continue. What was relational control when they were married just becomes a procedural control out using the court system to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, I see it very often. It's a way of gaining leverage just using the legal system.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure that it's common because it happens to me often where, the person who has been the victim of actual domestic abuse, coercive control, eh, didn't speak up about this abuse during the life of the marriage or the relationship, largely based off of fear. They didn't want things to be worse.
Hmm.
And then they're going through this legal process, and we talk about a pattern of behavior, right? And they don't really have a whole lot of evidence or documentation to show that the abuse was actually happening, maybe other than some journal entries, maybe that session or two that they had with a therapist. What would you still say to those individuals that are trying to show that this pattern of behavior has continued from their marriage to the post separation divorce period?
You are correct that if it hasn't been revealed ahead of time, it very quickly looks like you're the one who's trying to, use the court system. And unfortunately, at that point, your strategy is to document and to make sure that your legal representation knows what's going on. The interesting thing to me is how many people continue to protect the abuser, continue to protect the one who's doing the damage. And by doing that, they allow it to continue, right?
Absolutely.
And leave themselves more open to more continuation because they're now, how do you suddenly turn around and name that? And so being very clear. I remember it's been a couple of years now. I was talking to somebody and she was describing what's going on. I said, "Did you tell your attorney about that?" She said, "Oh, I didn't want to do that because I didn't want bad stuff to happen to this person." And I'm like,
Oh my
This
goodness.
person is doing bad things. So
Mhm.
if you do not do that, you are not allowing your attorney to protect you, which is now their job. And so, that was a pattern for them to protect the other person that often continues in the process. So letting an attorney know what's going on and documenting as best you can allows at least that leverage. You're correct though that you're off on a difficult footing, but the question is, can you make sure that you're not allowing it to continue because of the dynamics that have been built into the relationship?
Right. And, for someone who has survived domestic violence, I will say that I recognized in myself how at the end of my marriage, I gave both of my ex husbands, right? I was giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I was like, oh, well, just because maybe the marriage was just terrible, they're going to be better. They're going to show up as a better parent. And I fell into that trap initially. And then I come to this really terrible waking of they're never going to change. They're just going to continue the behavior. There's moments, right, where you feel like you're on the roller coaster. It's really good and then it's really bad. And you still live through those moments post marriage. But so many individuals that listen to my show, that come and work with me, and I'm sure that, have encountered you over the years of your work, have been like, well, I did give them the benefit of the doubt. Shoot, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And kind of like in hindsight is always 2020. It's incredible to me how the amount of empathy that we have for people and how we feel sorry for them. Not everybody has empathy. We know narcissistic people lack empathy, right? But the amount of empathy that we have and believing that people can be better makes us, a prime victim for these types of relationship dynamics.
I think in marriages that can be repaired, benefit of the doubt is possible. The danger is when the benefit of the doubt keeps happening over and over and over and over and over and over.
Mm.
It's not okay, they misspoke that, but it's, oh, I'm seeing the pattern here that is constantly me being the wrong one. There's no change, there's no responsibility. So at that point, the benefit of the doubt is letting them off the hook. It's not really benefit of the doubt. And there's a sizable space between those two things. Am I constantly letting them off the hook that, by the way, they put themselves on, right? They
Yes, right.
created that. How
Exactly.
can I then step into clarity and responsibility? And so sometimes I think that that's it's not just about giving someone a benefit of the doubt that maybe they misspoke when they were tired, but the pattern of action is a repeated thing that you have to let them off the hook for.
Hmm. You talk about saving the marriage, and I want to take a moment to talk about saving the marriage for those that are, in a relationship, and maybe they're in a, like myself, in a new marriage, and there's no problems. But for those that have encountered maybe one thing that has happened in their marriage, um, cheating, I know, can be something that can tear apart marriages and relationships. And if there's someone that's listening that maybe them and their partner have encountered a situation of infidelity and cheating, but this has been a one-time occasion, right? This is not a repeated pattern of behavior. What would you say to those individuals who are, wanting to work on their relationship and their marriage and to stay in it? Is there a way to move past the infidelity and the cheating and staying in the marriage?
There is, if people want to do that. It is a major block. But let me just back up and say, just to be clear, we are talking about the kind of not the person who is the serial cheater who is
Yes.
constantly, yes. And so, I mean, I hate to say the kind of the run of the mill kind of situation, but the more typical is that the person who cheated was looking for connection that they were not finding. So so in a marriage where we're not talking about abuse, we're actually talking back to the run of the mill marriage issues,
Mhm.
where what's happened is they become disconnected. And that disconnection cuts at a deep human need we all have for that connection. And so then we start finding other places for the connection. That is what humans do. If it's a deficit here where we expected it, we'll find it somewhere else. And maybe we overly invest in kids or overly invest in friends or at work or other places or somebody outside of the marriage. The breach is the trust issue. And the question is whether both people can look and say, we were both a part of a disconnected relationship. And one person has to take responsibility for having broken the foundations of the boundaries of the relationship, and how they are willing to step back into that and be trustworthy, and then how the other person chooses to give trust is the central question of that recovery. For some couples, I've worked with them, they realized that the affair was the side effect of how disconnected they had become, and both of them were in that. So that was a piece. The
Mhm.
second was that the person who had taken action was willing to say, and I am still 100% responsible for that action. What do I need to do to regain trust? How can I be more trustworthy? How can I be transparent? How can I, other pieces? And the person who experienced that to be able to say, what does it take for me to give that trust? I think trust is always a gift.
Yeah.
Somebody can be trustworthy and still not be trusted. The gift is way too expensive. Sometimes people trust people who should not be trusted. They made it way too cheap. And so we have to find that balance point for ourselves. What does it cost? What's the gift I'm going to give of this trust? What do I need to see to give that? On that track, yes, they can recover. I just want to note, though, on a lesser level, that is true on how we recover a marriage anyway. How do we trust each other? How do we trust the relationship? How do we reconnect?
Mm. On trust for people that have experienced, narcissistic abuse, sometimes that can be hard, right? To encounter a healthy relationship, recognizing first of all, this is actually healthy,
Mm.
and I can trust this person. And I have questions that come up to me often, or comments that are shared of, well, my partner and I, we're in a healthy relationship, and we have access to each other's cell phones. We have a shared Facebook account, all of the things. To me, that says that's not really that healthy. Um, I personally don't need to have access to my husband's cell phone, and we prefer that it stays that way. But we know that we can use each other's phone if we ever needed to, right? That's just not a conversation that comes up. Um, what would you say about the couples that have to share everything? Or I'm sure you've encountered them. They have to go into each other's phones. What do you say about that? What are your thoughts?
But it certainly speaks to the trust. There's the difference between being able to and actually having to, right? I mean, so do I know the passcode to my wife's phone? I do.
Mhm.
Does she know mine? She does. Have I checked her phone ever? I have not. And it's
Right.
not an issue, right? And when I start hearing people tell me all of the ways they've set this up, I'm going, why is this such an issue? I mean, what are you trying to prove with that? And many people, instead of having trust, they have gotten into a pattern of checking. And that's not trust.
Mhm.
That is the opposite of that, right? They don't trust. And so they're trying to verify. Now, back to the affair thing, I think that there is some transparency that is fair after that, whatever that looks like for a couple. And so when people say, "Well, I've got full access to their phone," I'm like, you don't
No.
necessarily.
Yeah,
there,
exactly.
there are plenty of ways these days to hide
Mhm.
that. And so the reality is having that does not protect. I also know people that see that as a cultural piece, right? That they have done the
Definitely.
joint Facebook or the joint email accounts because of cultural, religious, other issues. And that's a different case. But when I hear people, it's kind of the protesting too much. Why are you so wanting to tell me about how you check up on each other, what's going on behind that? It tells me there's something going on, as opposed to, could I check? Yes. Do I ever check? I don't.
Mhm, mhm. And that took a lot of healing work for me, right? Because I had a serial cheating spouse, and I did find out a lot of things from, a random text message that would
Yeah.
pop up on his phone, right? And
Yeah.
so that definitely broke trust, and it kept happening over and over and over again. But I did the work in myself to recognize that, okay, not everybody is going to be that person.
Mm.
This is that individual, and he did these things to me. I don't need to go into any new relationship with the thought of every single person is likely going to cheat on me. And I did that for a while. And then I learned how to let go of that thought pattern and just say, okay, my intuition is going to tell me if something is off. And if it does, I will listen to it. And if it doesn't, great. Right. But again, it came back into listening to myself, listening to what my body was telling me, and learning how to let go of some things from my past and heal from them, which is not easy. Um, Especially when you're not the one that did the harm in the first
No.
place. You're healing
No.
from things that other people have done to you. Um, and I want to encourage anyone that's listening, right? Like there is a way to do that and a way to heal from, the harms from former relationships, past relationships. It doesn't mean that every single person in the world is likely going to cheat on you. Would you agree with that? there are good people out there.
Well, we know by statistics that that is the case. I mean, we have some ideas on what percentage cheat and how many people stay in happy marriages and how many people stay in marriages, period. So
Yes.
we have some evidence, not just anecdotes and personal feelings about that tell us that that is the case. There are plenty of people who are faithful for lots of different reasons. One is just because that's what they think of as decent, and
Mhm.
that lives within their values. So, one of the conversations I often have with people are, what are your values that you're working from? Are you reacting to the situations, or are you working from your values? And people do better in life when they're working from their values than when they're waiting for the reaction to some external event. So, a conversation that couples have in healthy places is to talk about what their values are. Now, to your point, you also may notice that their values aren't matching up with their actions. And that raises the question. That's part of what you were reading, is there's a disconnect here between what should be happening and what feels like is going on. And that mismatch was registering within you. It does sound like at some point you were trying to disregard that when you were seeing you know,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
text messages, and that probably, as you're noting, that tells me that you were fighting that down. You're not paying attention to that, and so turning to pay attention to that is the kind of the learning edge of that, of going, what information is there that I'm sensing that I'm not paying attention to?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I did at the time, I was blaming myself, right? Again, an abuser is really good at manipulating you and gaslighting you, so that I was feeling like there was something wrong with me. I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't loving him enough. I wasn't showing up enough as a wife. For the person listening right now that, might feel that same way, what would you say to them in a relationship if they're having the feelings of they're not enough or they're not doing enough?
So that's an interesting question, because marriage is not about trying to be enough. It's about accepting each other, because you are
Mhm.
who you are, right? And so if the person is giving you the message, well, the reason I'm doing this is because of you, that's a pretty clear sign that we've got an underlying pattern, as opposed to, our relationship is not where it needs to be as a relationship. We've disconnected. That's a very common thing in a marriage that can be repaired. Somebody saying you're the problem makes it something that's not repairable within the relationship. We're no longer talking the relational dynamic. We're talking about the personal dynamic, and not being enough. I mean, just, I point out to people, you married each other because you thought you were at the right place, right? And so
Yes.
that's not to be earned. You don't have to earn love. That is part of the deal. You do have to act lovingly in a relationship to keep it going,
Absolutely.
but you don't earn love. And that is just true in life. You never earn love. That is something that many people drag from their childhood, where they felt like they were trying to earn the love from a parent. It wasn't possible then. It's not possible in adulthood. There is either love there or it's not. And if there's disconnection, it can hide the love, but that's still not a matter of earning the love back.
What a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation. You've touched on everything that I had questions about, from relationships and saving, and how to identify things that maybe are off in a relationship or a marriage. Thank you so much for having the conversation
No,
with me
thank you.
today, Lee.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for being on. I appreciate your time and the work that you're doing. Um, I will make sure to share your information in the show notes of how our listeners can contact you and see all the amazing work that you're doing. For those that are not in abusive marriage relationship dynamics and want to save their marriage, if that is something that someone's experiencing, reach out to Lee. He is the person to help you. So, thank you again, Lee, for being on today with me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. If today's episode resonated with you, make sure you share it with someone who needs it. You can find me on all platforms as Coach Bridget B, or at my website, breakingbadasscoaching.com. If you are ready to work more with me in a session, check out some of my guides, learn how to master your documentation, or join my exclusive community, you can do that through the link that'll be in the show notes. I want you to remember, you have survived this far. You've made it through this episode, and you continue to show up. You're going to continue to survive, and I will see you in the next episode.